This Tyre Nichols situation was something else. It was really dark to see these people beat on that man in the way that they did. I think what really brought it home for me was the aftermath. That body cam footage where they're standing around and talking about the things and hearing the words come out of these officers' mouths so casually, it just said everything. One of the men said, "That was the longest fight I've been in a minute." And he starts describing the altercation. Two of us tased, another person had the pepper spray, so-and-so tased. And it was crazy to me to hear him say this is the longest fight I've been in a minute when it's 5 people against one guy who's handcuffed partially, being held by the other people, one person on his back while they're beating on this man, and he's calling it a fight. What kind of cowardice is that? How can you call something where someone is so defenseless considering the amount of these people and you're winded? It's so inhumane, I don't even know where to go. Another person talking about, "Man, I need saline, man. Well, I got hit with this pepper spray." Not that he was hit directly, but because the pepper spray that was sprayed directly on this person's eyes in ways that are not the way that you're supposed to be using it, there was enough in the air that it impacted all of them. And now he's asking for saline, despite the fact that another person, Tyre, was sprayed directly in his freaking face. Directly. Continuous blasts. None of them thought, what about his saline? The thought never even came to their mind. These people weren't acting like humans. The fact that they could not give him aid for 20 straight minutes with this amount of beating, we understand why he died, but they had no concern for his well-being. They were asking for their own help. They were concerned for themselves, with setting the record straight, trying to make sure that they had the story together, making sure that the lies were consistent so that they didn't have to face repercussions for their actions. It's no surprise to me that the 5 officers were fired. It makes all the sense in the world, because when it comes to accountability and things like that in this country, the first people that we want that to apply to is Black people. You see, this isn't like a brand new thing. Remember Black codes, how it was laws that were created that were only expected to be enforced against Black folks. Meaning, white people could do the exact same thing, but if a Black person was to do it, then a Black person would be penalized for it. Those were Black codes. And I think in the same sense, when we start looking at accountability, then these things happen towards Black people, but a white officer will be put on administrative leave while there's an investigation pending, and they start gaslighting the public and doing everything they can to talk about why is he resisting, or do whatever the frick they can, talking about rap sheets. It was crazy to me to find out that one of the top 4 searches on Google was rap sheets and priors. Because the first thing that people want to do when they start finding out that a Black man was murdered is they want to look at his rap sheet so then they can start using that to obfuscate and try to say, well, maybe this was fair, maybe this was justified. But there were more than 5 officers who were actually beating on this man or who were responsible. What about the 2 paramedics? They finally put those 2 paramedics on leave, but what about the other officer? There were other people who were supposed to help in this situation. And I think to sit and watch as this person is beaten in this way, I think you should be just as culpable. But this isn't just my thought process. This is the state of Tennessee's process. You see, their governor, not too long ago, they signed the Law Enforcement Reform Partnership. That was something that was signed by their governor, which was supposed to be used throughout all of their different police departments. And it was supposed to result in sweeping reform that would end up helping the nation and helping that individual state. One of the interesting things that was there was the duty to intervene. In this, they were supposed to, each station was supposed to sign off and recognize that there was now a duty to intervene from their officers if they saw any other person, including an officer, breaking the law. Clearly, they were violating this man's civil rights. None of these officers chose to act on it, which means then that all of you guys should be culpable as well. So that means every person who was complicit, even the people who didn't act, the people who sat there, watched it and stepped away and called other officers for additional backup against this one man, those people should still be held culpable as well. But we're only talking about the 5 officers and 2 paramedics. There were so many more people on the scene that didn't do their jobs. They were charged with second-degree murder, which has a minimum sentence of 15 to 60 years, an additional $50,000 fine. But that's going to come out of those individuals The thing that really sucks about this is very frequently when police officers violate conduct, when they sit there and they end up murdering people, we can sue them, but as a result, the taxpayers are the one that pay for it. It doesn't come out of the officer's pension. It doesn't hurt them at all. Which is why I've always said it makes sense that officers should carry some sort of insurance. And so then that way, when these things happen, their premiums go up, it comes out of their pocket, and then it actually disincentivizes them. And when they're sued, these things ought to come out of officer pension, which would encourage other officers to start holding other officers accountable. You see, the greatest way of causing people to do what you want them to do is to make them want to do it. What makes a person want to do things more than their own self-interest? So then that way you get rid of this culture, because these aren't just a few bad apples. It is a cultural problem. And that's exactly why the reform that was passed in Tennessee didn't exactly work. You see, a lot of times rules and regulations are there so that the higher ups have something that they have to hold people accountable to. But what really defines the culture are how people act, the general ideas held by the people who are supposed to be part of that culture. It's like when they give you a company handbook and they tell you, this is exactly how you're supposed to function. This is what you're supposed to do. These are the rules. These are the regulations. These are the terms of service. This is what your breaks are going to be. How many of you actually take longer breaks than what you're actually expected to? How many times do you hear, this is what the rules say, but this is the way we do it? The regulations and the rules are there as a guide, but in reality, the culture is what defines things. So simply reforming doesn't actually fix it. There has to be a culture shift. And in order to get that culture shift, there has to be incentivization. The end of qualified immunity is one of those incentives. I watched the video, and one of the grossest parts about it was I just remembered hearing him call for his mom, which reminded me of when George Floyd called for his mom. And I think I read about this thing that was talking about a linked fate phenomenon, whereas Black people, when we watch these kind of videos, then we end up seeing ourselves in the victims. We see our fate linked to theirs, and it ends up causing trauma. It reminds me of when I went on the Jesse Lee Peterson show, and he asked about me being traumatized by the George Floyd video, because it was in fact traumatizing.
In the middle of all of the unrest, I would say the trauma caused by the George Floyd situation.
You were traumatized by that?
Absolutely.
How old are you?
I'm 37 now.
And you were traumatized by George Floyd thing?
For sure.
What?
Do you not? Well, I know you're not a psychologist. So yeah, I get it. I know you probably struggle with psychology. But sure, so I would say that, and it wasn't just that one in and of
Are
itself.
you grown or are you a baby?
I think I'm a pretty grown man.
How you gonna be traumatized by something like that?
Do you think grown men can't be traumatized?
No.
Oh,
they
okay.
can if they're in a fallen state, but...
Prior to that, I was just playing video games, loving my life, having a great old time. And after that, it gave me the realization that someone has to start speaking about these situations in a very clear way. And that actually is what caused me to start joining the politisphere and having these kind of conversations and getting in these debates. It was insane to have that man sit there and laugh at me when I say that it was traumatizing, as if it was something funny. But he's so disconnected from the Black experience that, of course, he can't feel that. But it's not just him. What's really interesting to me is the fact that we do have this linked fate phenomenon. Some people can't understand it, but yet we are judged collectively. You see, when one Black person does something, then a lot of people will judge all Black people based on those things. And then as a result of that, now we have this collective identity. But then when we invert that and say, well, therefore, I will have a shared fate or a linked fate with the individuals who are having these sorts of interactions with the police officers. Instead, now we're looked at as if we're being silly, as if this has nothing to do with us. People love the double standards in these types of situations. It was sad to me because I understood this mentality where people were saying, because of the fact that the officers have been charged with second-degree murder, because they were fired about 2 weeks after the incident occurred, then it would make sense that people who are protesting should abstain from rioting or any of those sorts of things. The problem is that a lot of times when these sort of situations end up happening, people aren't rioting because of an individual. They're rioting because of this ongoing unrest, the ongoing feeling that things aren't changing. The fact that we've been protesting police brutality in this country, Black Americans have been doing it for well over 100 years. In the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedoms, that was one of the most frequent signs that was held up, the end of police brutality. The fact that we could have asked for that then and that is still occurring now is a problem. Simply changing the race of the individuals doesn't fix it. It can, it might, but it's not going to completely eradicate it. There has to be meaningful reform. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act was beautiful. It was one of the best pieces of legislation ever. It's not going to fully fix the problem. There has to be a greater system, a greater culture of accountability. I hope that these officers get the book thrown at them. It sucks when the first people to get this sort of punishment are Black people. I mean, Derek Chauvin was another one-off, but it really does bother me. There's a part of me that's inclined to want to say, no, let's make sure we treat these officers like we do the other ones. And I hate that we'll allow the white officers to get away with it, but then the Black officers are the first ones that will start deciding we want to really enforce things and make sure that we go by the letter of the law. I can't defend them. I can't. I won't. But there needs to be greater accountability. They have something called the NDI, which is the National Decertification Index. It's something that when officers are fired or let go, they should be registered on this National Decertification Index, so that way they can't just simply go to the next police station over and work there. It's crazy to me that that's even a thing. You get fired from a job, they're going to ask you about who was your last employee and why you were let go. Are we saying that police officers are so incompetent that in their hiring practices, they don't even question your last job? Is that a thing? Why would we need a national index? Why are we constantly having to police the police? This situation is sick. I've been tweeting about some of the ridiculousness, responding to some of it. Larry Elder talking about, oh, are these officers going to get reparations? Just sick stuff. The family of Tyre were asking people not to riot, that it would, take away from the legacy of this situation. And I understand where they're coming from, and I hope people abide by that. I say that with the understanding that the riots and things that are happening aren't tied to an individual incident. They are tied to a general fervor that is attached to all of the brutality and things that happen. So while I hope that people respect the wishes of his family, I understand that a lot of the violence and things like that happen because people feel unheard. Let's see them ignore George Floyd's Justice and Policing Act yet again, and nothing changes from this situation besides people sending their well wishes, doing all of those types of things, and some protests, but then nothing actually changes. When do Black Americans ever get meaningful civil rights changes within this country without violence? I can't think of a single time. Can you? Let me know. Because we obviously know the 1967 or the Fair Housing Act came on the heels of all of those, the long hot summer of 1967 with all those widespread riots. We understand that the 1964 Civil Rights Act came on the back of all of those violent protests. It seems like every civil rights thing that happens for Black people has to happen with violence. I wish we could just have more empathy. I wish there were people that were more concerned. I wish that they had the same energy when white officers did the same thing. I don't even know what to say. It's just sad. It's just sad. There was a video released by his family in which it shows him just being a skateboarder, having a good time. And I think that's a video that we all need to share so that we remember the humanity and the dignity of the individual that was just brutally murdered by these police officers. It cannot be that all we know about this person is he was brutalized. And I think that's part of the problem. I think when all we see is the brutalization, it causes us to somewhat dehumanize the person. He was a well-spoken, seemingly pretty decent dude. This is sick.
This